Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all on my screen and to sense the wholehearted participation that you're giving to our online retreat. Our Shuso Muke Shoman chose as our study text Dogen's instructions to the cook, and I was very pleased to hear this because I think in many ways this fascicle, actually it's not in the Shobogenzo, but it's probably one of the high points in Dogen's thought, maybe one of the most important texts in the whole Zen literature, at least for me. And I think the reason it's so important is because it's a definitive opening of the koan that Dogen came to practice with. I think, as many of you know, Dogen's heart question, the central koan that kind of bedeviled him, was, if we're all Buddhas, perfect and complete, living in a perfect Buddha land, then why do we have to practice? Why do we have to work so hard, moment after moment after moment? Why is what should be easy and natural so difficult? Now, I don't know why this became the central koan of Dogen's life, but I do have some speculation, which I'd like to share with you. So Dogen, when he began his practice in Japan, first in the Tendai school and later in the Zen school, he wasn't exposed to the Soto way of looking at things. He practiced in the Rinzai sect. And they have a model, and it's a perfectly good model, I should say. There's nothing wrong with it. It's a model, which is basically summed up by the image of, you practice to ascend the mountain of enlightenment. You work really hard. You reach the peak, and you see it, you realize it. And that happens rather early in practice, really. And then you spend the rest of your formal practice letting go of that, descending from that high peak and re-entering the marketplace with bliss bestowing hands and helping beings. And you come across phrases like ascending the mountain is the easy part, descending is hard. So you notice that at the end, the practitioner ends up where he started, at the bottom of the mountain in the marketplace, with no sign of a peak anywhere. But you can also see why this way of looking at practice might raise that question in Dogen's mind. Well, why huff and puff to get to the peak when you're already there? So this question of Dogen's, one way he answered it was through his advice to us on how to do zazen. And if we really listen to what he says, I think it's very compassionate advice. So normally, when we do zazen, at least for a long time in our practice, we're constantly kind of separating ourselves and sort of checking our mental state. Am I peaceful enough? Am I going to realize it in the next moment? Or, oh my gosh, no, my mind is way too busy. I'm not doing this right. Oh, my knees hurt. So we go back and forth between saying, okay, I'm doing good zazen, I'm doing bad zazen. We're constantly checking our mental thermostat to see if it's at the ideal setting. And Dogen tells us, no, you don't have to do that. He, in his instructions on zazen, he starts out with citing a mondo of the Dharma grandfather of the Soto school, Yaoshan, when a monk asked Yaoshan, what do you think about when you're doing zazen? And Yaoshan says, I think about not thinking. And the monk says, how do you think not thinking? And Yaoshan says, beyond thinking. So Dogen spends quite a lot of time in his fascicle, The Point of Zazen, delving in to this mondo. And what he says is, what it comes down to is the act of sitting up straight in zazen is itself practice realization. It doesn't have to do with any being in any particular state of mind. And when he talks about beyond thinking, he says something that to me is very comforting. He says, the activity of beyond thinking is crystal clear. In beyond thinking, even if it is you who are sitting steadfastly, you are not only thinking, so yeah, your mind's doing whatever crazy stuff it does. You not only are thinking, but you are upholding steadfast sitting. You are upholding steadfast sitting. So no matter what crazy thing your mind is doing, your spine is functioning properly and enabling you to sit up straight. Gravity is functioning properly, allowing you to stay on the ground. Your feet touch the floor quite naturally. The energy in your body is the life energy of the sun coming through the activities of the farmer who prepared the crops that grew in the sun and that ultimately are sustaining you. So far from being a tool to get to some far off state called enlightenment, zazen is the expression of the practice enlightenment of the whole universe. When sitting steadfastly, how can steadfastly sitting think steadfast sitting? Thus, sitting steadfastly is not Buddha thought, Dharma thought, enlightenment thought, or realization thought. So even if you're sitting there with a busy, deluded mind, wondering when you're going to get to realization, Dogen is telling us it's a done deal. You're manifesting practice realization through your wholehearted sitting. So why doesn't our zazen feel special? I mean, occasionally it does, but most of the time we're just sitting there and our mind is doing what it's doing and our body is either hurting or not hurting. So although we're manifesting practice realization, it really doesn't feel special at all. We're not even really aware of it. Pro tip, sitting there repeating over and over again, oh, right now I'm manifesting practice realization. That's not the point. The point is to sit with wholehearted body and mind with whatever is coming up for you in the moment. This is the illumination of the Buddhas and ancestors, Dogen tells us. Just this wholehearted practice of the moment. And he says, again, poo-pooing the idea that there's anything special about it, he says that people often think that illumination of Buddha light is like sunlight or the light of a jewel, or whatever kind of fireworks you want to imagine. But Dogen says the fireworks and that kind of illumination is just transient moments in the Saha world of coming and going. So what he says is, and this is really important and really connects to what he said about upholding steadfast sitting. He says, illumination does not depend on causes and conditions. Illumination does not depend on having a big aha moment. You're not closer to it when you have a big aha moment. You're not further away from it when you're saying, how the hell can I do a session at home without all this stuff going on around me where I should be up at Wisdom House where I can get away from it all. Neither the aha moment or the disagreeable moment are any closer or further away from illumination. He says illumination does not turn to conditions, does not depend on conditions, as conditions are already illumination. So whether your knees are hurting, whether your mind is busy, whether the phone is ringing, whether Zoom is functioning or malfunctioning, causes and conditions are already the illumination of the Buddhas and ancestors. And then he says, going beyond thinking, beyond any idea of illumination as separate from this very moment, from this very set of causes and conditions, he says, beyond means the entire world is not hidden. Sound familiar? Beyond means the entire world is not hidden. A broken world does not appear. Or as Shinryu might have said, the temple is always right here. Temple is always right here. Every moment is a chance to wake up. Every moment is a chance to do service, maybe only by taking a breath and letting the breath out. In fact, between waking up and doing service, there isn't even the space to insert a single hair. So when Dogen sort of tells a story on himself in instructions to the cook, he portrays himself as a young fire-eating monk whose koan had not yet opened. And when he was in quarantine on the boat that landed in China, he got a visit from an old Tenzo, an old cook. And Miyoko alluded to this story briefly. I want to go into it a little more. And this cook, I don't know, he was like really old. He was like about 60. And he comes aboard and he and Dogen engage in dialogue. And Dogen is so pleased with the company of this man. He invites him, hey, stay overnight. I'll give you a meal. We'll keep talking Dharma here. And the old cook from Mount Ayuang says, no, I just came here to buy mushrooms so I could make my noodle soup. And now it's 14 miles back. I have to start back immediately. And Dogen says, but hey, come on, you're an old man. Why? I'm sure there are people who could handle the job while you're away. And he said, the cook says, well, this is the practice I have been given. You might say it's the practice of an old fart like me, which is a very humble thing to say, but perhaps also a way of saying this is the practice of someone who's been practicing the Buddha way for many, many years. So then Dogen really shows where he's coming from. And he says, well, is there something particularly special about the work of a Tenzo that you pursue it so wholeheartedly? And the old monk bursts into laughter and he says, my dear friend from abroad, your question indicates that you don't know what practice is and don't understand the meaning of characters. And Dogen says, what is practice? What is the meaning of characters? And the old monk says, if you really wholeheartedly pursue this question, your study of the Buddha Dharma will not be in vain. Ryotan Roshi translated this passage as, if you understand that your question is the central issue of the Buddha Dharma. Right there is practice. Right there is the meaning of characters. So some time goes by and the monk retires, and he returns, and they resume their conversation. And Dogen asks him, "What are characters?" And the old monk goes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And Dogen says, "What is the meaning of practice?" And the monk says, "Nothing in the world is hidden." So this is what Dogen says in his fascicle on the point of zazen. He says, illumination does not depend on conditions, as conditions are already illumination. What are conditions? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's a noodle soup that needs to be made. There are mushrooms that need to go back to Mount Ayuan, 14 miles away. There are monks that need to be given their instructions in how to prepare a flavorful soup for the community. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Causes and conditions. Illumination does not depend on causes and conditions. Causes and conditions are already illumination. This is what Dogen says he means by one of his main cryptic phrases, dropping away body and mind. He writes, when you have immediacy without illusion, what does he mean by immediacy? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Kitchen floor needs to be swept. When you have immediacy without illusions, immediacy is dropping away with no obstacles. The dropping away of body and mind is simply the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of character after character after character. Or as I like to say, of the koan of your life, opening and opening and opening and opening, moment after moment after moment. What need is there to look for some special kind of mental state, something that comes and goes, and you go, oh yeah, I had an enlightenment experience back there in 1992 or whatever. No, that's not what it's about. Illumination is here and now. Illumination is right there in the kitchen, right there in the furnace of your life, right there in that, for that potter that Miyoko talked about, in doing the tedious work of making the strips that can contain so many individual little flowers. Right there, not sexy, doesn't glow like a jewel, and yet it is the full illumination of the Buddhas and ancestors. And in throwing yourself into it wholeheartedly, you manifest the enlightenment, the practice enlightenment of the Buddhas and ancestors. And then Dogen comes to maybe what's the culminating statement of his entire teaching. So he begins by saying, when you have immediacy without illusion, Immediacy is dropping away with no obstacles. So what is realization? Dogen says, realization beyond real or apparent. There's that word again, beyond Buddha, beyond delusion, beyond enlightenment. Realization beyond real or apparent is effort without expectation. It's effort without expectation. Thus, there's no place to drive a wedge between practice and realization. Practice realization goes on at conventional sessions like we were hoping to have at Wisdom House. Practice realization goes on working with Zoom and seeing faces and boxes on a screen. Practice realization is about throwing yourself into the process of cooking your life. And as Dogen says, adding upon the mountain of goodness, wholeheartedly, sincerely throwing yourself into it right here and right now.